The first thing I noticed wasn't the music, it wasn't the flowers, it wasn't even the man waiting for me at the altar. It was the tray in my hands. Silver, heavy, shaking. "Careful," someone hissed behind me. "You're spilling." I looked down at my wedding dress, white, borrowed, already wrinkled, and saw a drop of tea stain the lace. Gasps. Not because I was the bride, but because I had made a mistake. "Why is she serving?" a woman whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter followed. Soft, cruel, the kind that cuts without touching. I searched the room for my groom. He didn't look at me. Instead, his mother snapped her fingers. "Table 7 is waiting." And in that moment, standing barefoot on a marble floor, holding a tray instead of a bouquet, I realized this wedding was never about love. It was about reminding me exactly where they believed I belonged. They said every bride remembers her wedding dress, the way it hugs her waist, the way it sparkles under the lights, the way it makes her feel chosen. I remember mine for a different reason. It didn't belong to me. I knew that the moment I put it on. The fabric was stiff, like it had already lived someone else's happiness. The zipper scratched my skin as my sister-in-law pulled it up without asking if it hurt. "Don't move," she snapped. "This dress is expensive." Not was, is, as if I was only borrowing it for a few hours. I looked at myself in the mirror. The reflection stared back, like a guest who had wandered into the wrong room. My hair was done simply, no veil, no jewelry, except the cheap earrings my aunt pressed into my palm that morning and said, "These will do." I wanted to ask, "Do what?" But I swallowed the question. I had learned early in this family that questions made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people became cruel. The wedding was in their house, not mine, not ours, theirs. A mansion with white marble floors and ceilings so high they made you feel small just by standing under them. I had lived here for almost 2 years after my engagement, not because they wanted me close, but because they wanted me useful. "Since you're here anyway," my mother-in-law would say, handing me lists. Laundry, dishes, guests. I told myself it was temporary, that after the wedding, things would change. Love makes you patient. Hope makes you blind. That morning, while guests arrived in silk and perfume, I was in the kitchen, not because I wanted to be, because someone had to make sure the tea was hot. The tray was heavier than I expected, silver, polished, cold against my palms. "Serve table 7 first," my mother-in-law said, adjusting her necklace in the mirror. "They're important." I wanted to laugh. Aren't I important today? Instead, I nodded. The kitchen door swung open and the noise rushed in. Music, laughter, heels clicking on marble. I stepped into the hall. And that's when I felt it. Eyes. On my hands. On the tray. On the way my dress brushed the floor as I walked. Confusion spread across faces like spilled ink. A woman leaned toward another and whispered, "Is she working?" Someone else giggled. I kept walking. Each step felt like I was shrinking. He stood near the altar. My groom. The man who promised me things at night when the house was quiet. "You're different," he used to say. "I'll protect you." I searched for his eyes. I needed him to see me, to stop this. He didn't. He was laughing with his cousins, adjusting his cufflinks, nodding proudly as guests congratulated him. I cleared my throat softly. Nothing. The tray trembled. A drop of tea slipped, staining the lace of my dress. A sharp inhale cut through the room. My mother-in-law turned. Her smile froze. "Careful," she said loudly. "Do you know how much that dress costs?" Silence followed. Not shocked silence, judging silence. I wanted the floor to open. "Why is the bride serving?" someone asked. Another voice answered, "Maybe that's all she knows how to do." Laughter. Low, polite, poisoned. I felt my face burn. This was supposed to be my entrance, Not like this, not carrying a tray, not barefoot because my shoes had been taken earlier, with the words, "You'll just scuff the floors." I finished serving. No one said thank you. When I turned back toward the kitchen, my mother-in-law snapped her fingers. Table 3 still needs refills. I looked at her, just for a second. Her eyes didn't soften. They warned. I locked myself in the bathroom. My hands shook as I pressed them against the sink. This is your wedding, I told myself. Smile. Endure. Don't embarrass him. I dabbed the stain on my dress with water. It didn't come out. Of course it didn't. Some things never do. I stared at my reflection. I looked tired, older than my years, like someone who had been shrinking for too long. A knock came at the door. "Hurry up," my sister-in-law said. "Guests are waiting." Guests, not family, not yours, just guests. When the music finally changed, I was guided, not walked, down the aisle. No arm offered, no pause for breath. People smiled, but their eyes followed my hands, checking if I was still holding something. I stood beside him. He finally looked at me, and for a moment I thought he saw it. The humiliation, the quiet tears pressing behind my eyes. Then his mother cleared her throat. He looked away. The vows were spoken, words about honor, about respect, about partnership. They floated above me, hollow. When he said, "I do," the room applauded. I whispered mine. No one noticed. After the ceremony, I wasn't led to the head table. I was led back to the kitchen. "Just help until dinner is served," my mother-in-law said. "Then you can sit." I didn't ask where. I already knew. As I poured drinks, laughter echoed from the hall. They toasted him. They praised his family. My name was barely mentioned. A child tugged my dress. "Are you the maid?" she asked. I opened my mouth, closed it, and nodded. Later that night, when the house finally quieted, I stood alone near the staircase. My dress was stained. My feet ached. My heart felt empty. I heard voices from the study. My mother-in-law's voice, low, serious. "And she doesn't know?" someone asked. "No, she doesn't need to." A pause. "After tonight, she'll understand her role." My stomach dropped. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. Understand my role? I leaned closer, and that's when I heard a name mentioned. A name that didn't belong to this family. A name tied to something far bigger than a wedding. Something they clearly thought I would never question. I stepped back before they could see me. My heart raced, because for the first time that day, I wasn't just humiliated. I was suspicious, and suspicion, I would soon learn, was dangerous in a house built on secrets. I didn't sleep that night. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. That name kept repeating itself, sharp, heavy, out of place. It didn't belong to his family. I knew that much. I lay beside my husband, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing even and calm. He slept like a man who had nothing to fear. I slept like a woman who had just realized she knew too little. At some point, he turned toward me. "You okay?" he murmured, half asleep. "Yes," I lied. The word tasted bitter. The next morning, I woke before everyone else, not because I wanted to, because my body had learned to. The kitchen was already waiting for me, dirty dishes, leftover trays, cold teacups stacked like reminders. My mother-in-law walked in while I was washing plates. "Good," she said, glancing at the sink. "At least you're useful early." I wanted to turn around, to say, "I'm your daughter-in-law." Instead, I scrubbed harder. She leaned against the counter. "Today, guests will come to say goodbye. Make sure the house looks presentable." "Of course," I said. Then quietly, "May I ask something?" She raised an eyebrow. "Ask." I hesitated. "Last night, I heard my name mentioned." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You hear many things in this house," she said calmly. "Not all of them concern you." Then she walked out. That's when I knew. Whatever they were hiding, it involved me. One afternoon, while dusting the hallway, I passed the study. The door was locked. It hadn't been before. I paused. Inside that room were the voices from the night before. Inside that room was the secret. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. But something told me, whatever they were hiding, they were protecting it from me. That night, during dinner, I tested something. "I used to love reading," I said casually. "I noticed the study has a beautiful library." My father-in-law looked up slowly. "Yes," he said, "it does." "May I—" "No," my mother-in-law cut in. "That room isn't necessary for you." Necessary. The word stung. 2 days later, my aunt from my side of the family came to visit. She hugged me tightly. "You look thin," she whispered. Before I could respond, my mother-in-law appeared. "We don't encourage too many outside influences," she said politely. "She's adjusting." Adjusting. That night, my husband confronted me. "My mother says you talk too much," he said. "To whom?" I asked. "Anyone." I laughed softly. "I barely speak." "That's the problem," he replied. "When you do, people listen." I stared at him. Was that fear in his voice? The chance came unexpectedly. My mother-in-law left the study unlocked one evening. My heart pounded as I stood outside the door. "Don't," my mind warned. I stepped inside. The room smelled like old paper and control. Files lined the shelves. I scanned spines until, there it was, my name, typed, clean, official. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Inside were documents I had never seen, birth records, property records, and one letter, addressed to me, unopened, dated years ago, before I ever met my husband. We met in a small cafe across town. She looked older, tired, but her eyes sharpened when she saw me. "They changed your life before you even understood it," she said, without greeting. She told me about my mother, about the job she had once held in that same family. Not as a maid, as a legal assistant. She had discovered something: property transfers, false signatures, and inheritance quietly redirected. "They refused to stay quiet," the woman said, and then she disappeared. My breath caught. "They told me she died of illness," I said. The woman shook her head. "She died of fear," she replied, "and what it did to her." I didn't want to hear the rest, but I did. After my mother's death, I had been left with something. Not money, not property, authority, a legal position that transferred to her only child, to me. But they needed control, the woman said, so they waited until I was old enough, vulnerable enough, in love. "They didn't just marry you into the family," she said. "They married your rights back to themselves." The room spun. My wedding wasn't a celebration, it was a strategy. That night I confronted him, not with anger, with calm. "Did you know?" I asked. He didn't deny it. "I knew some of it, not everything." "Enough to benefit?" I replied. He rubbed his face. "They said it was harmless, that you wouldn't care." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. "You watched them treat me like a servant," I said, "and called it harmless." He said nothing. Silence confirmed everything. I hadn't told him everything. I still had the letter. I had gone back to the study days later, when they least expected it, photographed every document, saved copies, hidden them where they couldn't reach. If they were playing chess, I had finally learned the rules. My mother-in-law cornered me one afternoon. "You've been out too much," she said. "I'm finding myself," I replied. Her eyes hardened. "Careful," she warned. "Independence doesn't suit everyone." I smiled. "It suits me just fine." She stepped closer. "You think knowing a little makes you powerful," she said. "It doesn't." I met her gaze. "No," I said, "but it makes me dangerous." I didn't confront them again. I prepared. Quietly. I contacted a lawyer, a real one, not theirs. I handed over the documents, watched his expression change as he read. "This," he said slowly, "is explosive." I exhaled for the first time in weeks. "So I'm not crazy?" I asked. He shook his head. "You were robbed," he replied. That evening, the family gathered for dinner. The table was full, laughter forced. My mother-in-law raised her glass. "To family," she said. I raised mine too. "To truth," I added softly. The room stilled. Eyes turned toward me. My husband stared. Fear flickered across his face. They felt it, the shift. They just didn't know how far it would go. After dinner, my father-in-law spoke. "We've decided that it might be best if you spend some time away. Away. Exile wrapped in politeness. For reflection," he added. I nodded. "Of course," I said. I went upstairs, packed a small bag, slipped the documents into my purse. Before leaving, I turned back and looked at the house one last time, the house they thought they owned. As I stepped out the door, my phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. "They don't know what's coming, but they will." I smiled, because the servant they trained to obey was about to return as someone they couldn't control. I didn't look back when I left. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally understood something. That house only had power because I kept asking for space inside it. I spent the night at a small hotel. No marble floors, no servants, no whispers, just silence. And for the first time since my wedding day, the silence didn't feel cruel. It felt safe. The next morning, my lawyer called. "They're nervous," he said. "They've started asking questions." "Good," I replied. He explained everything carefully. How my mother had uncovered illegal transfers, how her authority, her legal position, had passed to me when she died, and how marrying me into the family was the cleanest way to trap it again. "They underestimated you," he said. I smiled. "They always do." He called that afternoon. "You shouldn't have left," he said. Not, "I miss you," not, "Are you okay?" "You weren't supposed to find out like this," he added. I closed my eyes. "So there was a right way for me to be lied to?" I asked. Silence. "You chose them," I said calmly. "Now live with that choice." I hung up. 3 days later, my lawyer sent a formal notice. A legal meeting. Mandatory. Attendance required. They tried to delay it. They couldn't. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking. I wore a simple black suit. No jewelry. No apology in my posture. When I walked into that same house, they stood. Not out of respect, out of fear. My mother-in-law's smile trembled. My husband wouldn't read my eyes. I took my seat at the head of the table. No one stopped me. My lawyer spoke, slowly, clearly. He read my mother's findings. Everyone in that room had believed my mother was just an assistant. That's how they erased her. The forged signatures, the hidden transfers, the inheritance rerouted through manipulation and silence. But the documents proved what they tried to bury. My mother was never just an assistant. She was a silent partner. Then he read the final line. "All authority returns to the rightful heir." He looked at me. "That heir," he said, "is her. Not the assistant's daughter they ignored, but the rightful heir they hid." The room went still. My mother-in-law stood abruptly. "This is outrageous," she said. "She doesn't belong here." I met her eyes. "You're right," I said. "I don't belong where I'm treated like a servant." I slid a folder across the table. "But this belongs to me. Because it was never taken from a stranger. It was stolen from the real owner." Her hands shook as she opened it. For the first time, she didn't look powerful. She looked exposed. My husband finally spoke. "We can fix this," he said. "We're married." I looked at him, at the man who watched me serve tea in my wedding dress. "No," I replied. "We were never married." I stood. "This was a contract you signed. This was a role you accepted. But this," I said, touching my chest, "this was never yours." I laughed with dignity. Not shouting, not crying. Behind me, that family fell apart in whispers and legal panic. In front of me, a future they never planned for me to have. Months later, I stood in a new office, my name on the door, my mother's work restored. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat down, and smiled, because the last time I served anyone was the day they mistook my silence for weakness. They treated me like a servant at my own wedding, but they forgot one thing: a woman who learns her worth never kneels again. If this story moved you, remember this: not everyone who serves is weak. Some are just waiting for the truth. Like, subscribe, and share, because someone else needs this reminder today.